Bear presents Ordinary versus Overachiever. A lot of paints say they can do the job, but just one can bear through it all. Bear presents Ordinary versus Overachiever. A lot of paints say they can do the
planned meeting between U.S. and North Korean leaders. South Korea's president said the North has now dropped its long-held demand that the U.S. withdraw all its military forces from South Korea in exchange for denuclearization. The concession comes one day after President Trump said he was prepared to leave the meeting with Kim Jong-un if it falls short of his expectations. But President Trump said fully expects the meeting to take place. I'm joined now by our senior diplomatic correspondent, Michelle Kosinski, and our global affairs Affairs correspondent Elise Labott. Michelle, the new National Security Advisor, John Bolton, how does he figure into all this new strategy when it comes to North Korea?
Well, now we know that he's been advising Trump on how to make this meeting work, how not to screw it up, because that's, the big question surrounding this. How do you get something useful out of this without giving North Korea too much initially? And some people see even giving them this meeting as being a big deal without necessarily getting something in return. That remains to be seen. But Bolton has been advising Trump, for success, it doesn't have to be a super long meeting. It could be less than an hour to be considered successful. And if it doesn't go your way, just get up and walk out. For success, it doesn't have to say, especially when you hear what South Korea is saying ahead of their summit with Kim. They're saying, we need creative solutions. We're going to look for ways to make diplomacy work here. So to hear Trump say that, it's a very Trumpian thing to say. It's kind of hard to imagine in this meeting what would make him get up and walk out. But then again, it is Kim Jong-un and it is Donald Trump.
And all this discussion follows Mike Pompeo, the outgoing CIA director's visit to Pyongyang a couple of weeks ago to meet with Kim Jong-un. He's now been nominated to become the next Secretary of State. Amidst all of this, he was there in Pyongyang, but he didn't bring out those 3 American prisoners who have been held in North Korea for a long time.
But you can see over the last month or so that the North Koreans have been willing to discuss their release. They had some meetings in Stockholm, in Sweden, which is the protecting power for the U.S., about releasing them. Officials tell me that they've also been putting out feelers about further negotiations. I think the North Koreans want to keep it on a separate track. And I think the U.S. wants to keep it on a separate track, kind of the way they did with the Iran deal, because if the talks go bad, they don't want, the Americans to go the way of the talks if they stop talking. At the same time, I do think you're going to see some movement on the Americans close to or at the summit. Wouldn't it be a big coup for President Trump to be able to take them home or have them be released? And I think that is one of the things that they're discussing behind the scenes.
President Trump said that the talks between Mike Pompeo in Pyongyang with Kim Jong-un, as far as we know, he's only the second American to ever meet with Kim Jong-un since becoming the leader of North Korea. Dennis Rodman, the NBA star, was the first. The president says they had great conversations. It was a great meeting.
Yeah, and that Kim was personable. And you hear the North Koreans saying many of the right things. I mean, just today that they're saying they won't insist that the U.S. take its troops out of the Korean peninsula. I mean, that's a big deal. So they've been saying the right things. This, of course, is a big game of leverage. Who's going to be willing to move and who's going to give over what? It seems like the Americans held there is going to have to be in the game, though. I mean, we saw releases around the Iran nuclear deal. We saw even Turkey giving up people that were held there before Tillerson met with him. So it seems hard to imagine that this summit would happen without them doing something about these Americans.
Very quickly, they got to figure out a place where to meet.
That's the big hang-up. There are about half a dozen locations. President Trump said yesterday some are in Europe, some are in Asia. I think that they're leaning towards something closer to Korea, whether it's the DMZ, whether it's this Peace Island that's near South Korea. Kim Jong-un doesn't like to travel too far, but wouldn't it be this kind of pageantry? President Trump likes to do something that no president has done before. I think you might see it a little bit closer to the Koreas.
Let's see where it is. That'll be very significant as well. Guys, thanks very, very much. Leaving a world of torture behind, an American woman tricked by her husband into joining ISIS fights to leave Syria with her children. You're going to want to see this exclusive CNN report. That's next.
I'm pretty handy around the house, but now that I have kids, I don't want to spend a Saturday installing a toilet or fixing an air conditioner. Thankfully, there's HomeAdvisor. A HomeAdvisor helps me find the best home pros in my area to handle any kind of project. They have verified reviews of the pros, and they do background checks, so you know you can trust them with your home. You can compare prices, book appointments, and what my wife loves most is that HomeAdvisor is completely free to use.
Go to HomeAdvisor.com or download the free app.
Now on Blu-ray.
The way they lied, those days have to be over.
Get the must-see, untold true story.
You're talking about exposing government.
All it took was a vacation for one woman's world to be turned upside down. American Sally Sam says she was duped into joining ISIS by her husband, enduring the horror of ritual vacation for one woman's world. Now all she wants is simply to return home to Indiana. CNN's Nick Payton Walsh has this story.
The story of how an Indiana family went from a mundane life of sports cars and the delivery business to joining ISIS, and to see their son here, the face of ISIS propaganda against America, is one of mystery, compassion and animal savagery that stretches belief.
So get ready, for the fighting has just begun.
All I saw was a bunch of drug-using thugs that came from their countries who had no place.
We meet Sam, Sally, 32, Matthew, 10, and Sarah, aged 5, and her youngest 2, born in the so-called ISIS caliphate, now in Syrian custody. In limbo, and whether they go home or not depends in part on how well Sam explains her innocence in the 4-year-old deal behind them. Her story begins with a vacation to Turkey that led to a border town where she says she was duped to crossing into ISIS's world.
There will be people who simply don't believe you.
They can believe whatever they want to believe, but they've never been put in a situation to make a decision like that.
At the ISIS border crossing, she says she faced an impossible choice. Her husband grabbed little Sarah, while she had Matthew.
The position I was in was to stay there with my son or watch my daughter leave with my husband. And I had to make a decision. I thought, like I said, we could just walk across the border and we could come back again.
She chose to keep the family together. But it's hard to believe Sam didn't ever realise what she was getting into. It was also when the gentle comforts of her marriage ended and her husband Musa, who'd never even seemed devout in America, became an abusive monster.
Before, he used to spoil me. I love you. We were very much in love. The romance never left. As soon as we came here, it was completely different. Everything was completely different. I was a dog. I didn't have a choice. It was extremely violent.
Musa travelled a lot to fight. He beat Sam at home, but still had 2 more children with her in Raqqa. Quite why, part of the stifling twists of a clearly abusive relationship may remain locked inside Sam, along with exactly what she knew and when about Musa's radicalisation. Remarkably, Musa suggested they buy slaves, some of the Yazidi girls captured by ISIS in 2014. They spent $20,000 on 2 teenage girls, Suad and Bedrine, and a younger boy, Ayhan. Done to keep her company, she says, and rescue the slaves to a better life. Yet Musa repeatedly raped the girls.
When I met Suad, I couldn't think about money. I would have spent every dollar I had on her to bring her.
But it turned out that she was repeatedly raped by your husband.
That is true, but in every house that she was in before, that was the same situation, but she didn't have the support of someone like me.
Do you now not regret enabling that serial rape?
No, because it would have been worse with anybody else. And no one will ever be able to imagine what it's like to watch their husband rape a 14-year-old girl. Ever. And then she comes to me after crying, and I hold her and tell her it's going to be okay, everything's going to be fine, just be patient. I would never apologize for bringing those girls to my house. We knew that if we were just patient, we would stick through it together. You understand? I was like their mother.
Astonishingly, Suad sent this message from a refugee camp, confirming Sam's kindness and how Sam was beaten black and blue as she tried to protect her from Musa. I'm doing well with my family, she says, and I want to see you even just once more. Let me know what I can do to get you out. Yet the terror did not stop there. Matthew, born in Texas of Sam's first marriage to an American soldier, was a prized cast member for an ISIS film shoot.
How did Matthew come to be in that video? I recognise him from it.
It was not by choice. I ended up with 2 broken ribs over that video. I fought.
What do you remember of that day, Matthew?
It was hard. I didn't want to do it. He would hit me, he would stress me.
Musa died in a drone strike late last year.
And I was able to breathe. It was like, okay, we can start phase 2.
Tens of thousands fled the Raqqa siege, but Sam said she only felt safe at the very end, leaving with these last hundreds of ISIS given passage out in a deal. The FBI has interviewed them, but there are no charges yet or tickets back home.
We want to eat McDonald's and, we want to live a normal life for us again.
Instead, now, she is surely reliving her decisions over and over again. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, Northern Syria.
I want to thank Nick for that amazing report. Other news we're following coming up. Is the president in for a 2020 revolt? I'll ask Republican Congressman Mark Meadows about reports many members of the Republican Party aren't ready to back President Trump's bid for re-election.
Taxpayers have rights. Do you know your rights? We do. We're Community Tax. If you owe
Non-committal when it comes to 2020. Several Republicans now say they aren't yet ready to say if they will back President Trump for re-election. Others say they're not sure the president will really be interested in running again. Listen to this.
I have no idea who's going to run for president in 2020, and I'm not about to say who I would support for that. So we have no idea who's going to run. Whether the president runs again or not, I think is very questionable.
Joining us now, North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows. He's a Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's also chairman of the conservative House Freedom Caucus. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Wolf. Thanks so much.
Do you think the president is going to run for a second term, and will you support him?
You know, I think that not only is he going to run for a second term, but he's going to run strongly for a second term, already putting together his team to do that. So suggestions by some senators that they don't know or they're not supporting him really is not something that I'm hearing back home in my district. I can tell you that, you know, when you have more money in your paychecks, that bodes well for a re-election. But my conversations with the president don't give me any indication that he's not running, and certainly I'll support him, and we're going to try to make sure that we continue to deliver on behalf of this administration to the American people what they've asked for. And so Senator Corker or any of the others weighing in, I think normally it's the other way around. Senators are asking for his endorsement, not the president seeking theirs. But even with that, I think he'll run strong.
All right, let's get to some other issues in the news right now. As you know, a lot of Republicans have been highly critical of the special counsel, Robert Mueller, saying he's overstepped his bounds. But prosecutors are pushing back on that idea, saying he hasn't gone rogue at all. Why not just let him finish his job?
Well, listen, we've been all about him finishing his job. I believe that he should finish his job and get it done quickly. You know, even Director Comey said a year into the investigation, you know, into Hillary Clinton, he believed that he had all the information he needed to either have a guilty or not guilty verdict. We're past 1 year on this Russia collusion narrative. I think he needs to bring it to a close and finish it. You know, when we talk about prosecutors are saying he hasn't gone beyond the scope of it, no one really knows. I mean, Bob Mueller is doing his investigation. Much of that is not leaked to the press. Kudos to him for that. But in the other part of that is, you know, everybody's opining on what should or shouldn't happen. I can tell you there's no evidence of collusion. At this point, we need to bring it to a close and get serious about what matters to your viewers and certainly to me, and that's making sure the economy and jobs continue to grow and spending our effort there.
Yeah, we don't know what, if any, evidence he's found Mueller and his team as far as collusion, other sensitive issues as well. Let's see what he comes up with. But I assume, Congressman, you would oppose the president's firing of Mueller or Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General.
Well, I think those are two different questions, Wolf, and one of those is really with Bob Mueller. There has been no discussions whatsoever about this president firing Bob Mueller. I think he's frustrated with the fact that this investigation continues to go on, as most Americans are frustrated with it. And yet, at the same time, Rod Rosenstein, you know, he's issued a scope letter and has given Bob Mueller the directions that he sees fit in terms of that investigation. At this point, Rod Rosenstein has a number of other issues, and that's really getting documents to Congress that we've asked for, and he needs to get serious about that. Hopefully he will be, but I see those as two separate questions. I don't think Bob Mueller is in jeopardy of being fired or terminated. Perhaps you know, Rod Rosenstein is a little bit more ambiguous in terms of his future with this administration.
So would you be okay with the president firing Rosenstein?
You know, really, Rosenstein's real problem right now is more with Congress than it is with the president. And I can tell you that, you know, having really requested a number of documents, having subpoena deadlines that have come and gone without real response, having really the AG's office admit that they've been redacting things inappropriately in their sending of information to Congress. He needs to get serious about responding to congressional requests in days, not in weeks or months. And if he's willing to do that, I think it'll bode well for him, bode well for our country, and obviously will take some of the pressure off of him that he's getting from members of Congress.
As you, of course, know, the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, he has already announced he will not seek re-election. Who do you want the next speaker to be, assuming the Republicans retain the majority?
Well, I would be disappointed, Wolf, had you not asked that question, and you're going to be disappointed in my response. Obviously, there's not a race that's going on right now. Kevin McCarthy is certainly the front runner, but really there's a number of other people beyond the ones that have been reported that are talking about jumping into that race. So I don't see that race happening until after the November midterms. You know, there's a question right now whether we keep the majority or not. And so whether you run for Speaker or Minority Leader may be a decision that we make in the coming months, not in the coming days. But right now, I can tell you there's no one who has 218 votes to be the Speaker other than Speaker Ryan. And so that's a case to be made, whether it's made by Kevin McCarthy or Steve Scalise or Jim Jordan or anybody else that might be considering a run.
Congressman Mark Meadows, thanks as usual for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf. Always great to be with you and your viewers.
Thank you. Thanks very, very much. An important programming note to all of our viewers. Don't miss James Comey later today live here on CNN. He sits down one-on-one with our own Jake Tapper, 4 p.m. Eastern on The Lead. You'll want to see that. Coming up, the Fox News host Sean Hannity being dubbed the president's unofficial chief of staff.
What is Hannity? Is he an opinion journalist? Is he an advocacy? I'm a talk show host.
The famed attorney Alan Dershowitz, he's standing by live. He'll weigh in on Sean Hannity's ties to the president. He'll weigh in on President Trump's longtime fixer Michael Cohen and other sensitive issue. Alan Dershowitz will join me live right after this.
to Jake. The Lead with Jake Tapper, today at 4.
President Trump is reaching out and calling on friends and former advisors for advice on the investigation into his personal attorney, Michael Cohen. The advice: don't trust him. Joining us now, the famed Harvard emeritus professor Alan Dershowitz. He's also the author of the book Trump Up. There you see the book cover there. Alan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So do you think Michael Cohen, under enormous pressure, he's being investigated as part of this criminal investigation, will flip and cooperate with federal prosecutors?
I have told every client I've represented over the last 53 years, assume your best friends will flip. Prosecution has an enormous leverage. They can charge you with a dozen crimes, even if they're relatively technical crimes, that accumulate with the guidelines and tell you you're going to never see freedom again. You're going to serve the rest of your life in prison. That kind of pressure brings about not only singing, but sometimes composing. And that is, witnesses realize that the better the story, the better a deal they get. And so the risk is they will exaggerate or elaborate or even sometimes make up stories. So I think the president has to assume that his closest friends, his greatest associates, the people he trusts the most, if exposed to the pressure, the risk of life imprisonment, will flip. That has to be his working assumption.
Yeah, I just want to be precise. Michael Cohen hasn't been charged with anything, at least not yet, though he is under criminal investigation. Do you agree with the president's former lawyer, Jay Goldberg, that the president should simply stop talking to him and assume he's going to flip and cooperate with federal prosecutors against him?
Yeah, Jay Goldberg is one of the great criminal lawyers of my generation, and his advice should always be taken very seriously. He should not be talking to him, and if he is talking to him, somebody should be a witness, and he should just be saying, hi, I wish you well. But people get into a lot of trouble talking to potential witnesses, because then the witness can say credibly, well, he talked to me, and there'll be a phone record that he talked to me, but he could elaborate on what he said.
What did you think of the president's decision to phone Michael Cohen on the same day that the FBI raided his home, his hotel room, his office, his safe deposit box, took his computers, all the electronic equipment? Was that a wise move on the part of the president to call his attorney and speak to him on that day?
It was an understandable move. This is a man who he's known for years and years and years, and he wanted to show that, he still supports him. But no, it was not a wise move. It's far, far better not to speak to people who might be potential witnesses against you or even in your favor. If you speak to them and they're a witness in your favor, they can be cross-examined about the conversation that they had with you. So no, it was not a wise move. The president makes a lot of decisions about talking when he shouldn't talk, and they end up hurting him. My advice to him on television, I'm not his lawyer, I'd never give him advice, was, don't tweet, don't pardon, don't fire, and don't testify unless you have to.
Well, he's not listening to at least part of your advice, as you well know. The president, though, he has the power of pardoning Michael Cohen or anyone else he wants. That's a very, very vast ability that he has, potentially, to convince individuals under criminal investigation, don't say anything ill of the president.
Well, of course, President Bush had that same power, and he exercised it in relation to Caspar Weinberger and 5 other people. The problem is that states have become much more sophisticated recently, and there's a state investigation, and he can't pardon people who are charged or convicted of state violations. In fact, New York is now thinking of passing a new statute which would permit double jeopardy, in effect, prosecution of somebody who has been pardoned by the president federally would be allowed to be tried on comparable or even identical state charges. This is a way of trying to eliminate the power of the pardon, at least as to some potential witnesses.
If the president hasn't done anything wrong, why should he even be so concerned about individuals flipping?
Well, of course, you always have to be concerned about that. Again, in so many years of practice, it's a mistake to say, if you've done nothing wrong, why should you plead the Fifth? Why shouldn't you allow a search? Why shouldn't you ABCD? It's certainly possible for people who have done nothing wrong to be caught up. As I've said, you can be prosecuted or charged with perjury for telling the truth. If somebody tells a different truth and the prosecution believes that truth, that's what happened with Scooter Libby. Scooter Libby told what he believed was the truth. Somebody came in and told a different truth. He was prosecuted, and now the president has pardoned him. So we see examples of that all the time. Prudence requires that you always assume that anything you do and you say can eventually be used against you. You know, they say, why shouldn't he cooperate with the prosecution and sit down and talk to them? Well, we heard Comey. Comey says that the only reason they call somebody after an investigation like Hillary Clinton or like President Trump is to see if they'll lie. They already have made up their mind tentatively whether or not to charge or not to charge, and then they call them in to see if they'll lie. That's a very good reason for why criminal defense lawyers like me tell clients never volunteer to speak to a prosecutor. They're not there to help you. They're there to hurt you.
I want to get your reaction, Alan, to some news that's breaking right now. The Justice Department's Office of the Inspector General has just sent a criminal referral regarding Andrew McCabe, who was the fired deputy director of the FBI, to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me they think he committed perjury or lying to government officials. Look, I think these criminal referrals should be used very sparingly. I think we use the criminal law far too much to attack our political enemies, and the criminal justice system has become too politicized on both sides. Lock her up, lock him up. I think the criminal law should be the last resort, not the first resort. If he's committed an obvious crime, there should be an investigation, but not to try to stretch the law to fit political opponents. I fear that.
One final question. Michael Cohen, how much legal trouble is he in?
Oh, he's in a lot of trouble. I think the prosecution would be embarrassed if they searched a lawyer's office and took a treasure trove of material and tried to turn it over to a taint team to go through if they, in the end, didn't find evidence of crime against him. So I think he's in very serious legal jeopardy.
Alan Dershowitz, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, outrage after the president describes sanctuary cities as a breeding concept. Was that a racist comment? I'll get reaction from Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. That's next. Following the breaking news, the Inspector General over at the U.S. Department of Justice has just announced that they have sent a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Washington, D.C. Criminal referral for Andrew McCabe. Andrew McCabe, as you remember, the fired FBI deputy director. He was fired only a couple days before he was supposed to receive his full pension. Let's get reaction immediately from the New Jersey Senator, Bob Menendez. He's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, what's your reaction to this criminal referral? Michael Horowitz, as you know, the Inspector General at the Department of Justice, saying, presumably saying that he committed perjury, McCabe, and should be tried criminally.
Well, Mr. McCabe has asserted not only his innocence, but had a different set of facts. Obviously, the U.S. Attorney is going to have to evaluate the referral and what's been said and make a determination. And we'll see where it goes from there.
Let's get your thoughts on some other sensitive issues right now. As you know, we're expecting a close vote in your committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, on Mike Pompeo, the outgoing CIA director, in line to become the next Secretary of State. If he could get past the Senate, if he can get past, he's probably not going to be confirmed in the Foreign Relations Committee, but presumably there'll be still a full vote on the Senate floor. You oppose his confirmation, right?
I do. I think that Director Pompeo failed to establish that he would be a robust advocate for diplomacy versus the knee-jerk reactions of the president to military action. I think he was not transparent, both on the question of the Mueller investigation, questions that were placed to him about Russia, which is a critical issue before the committee. He certainly wasn't transparent about his visit to North Korea. And when we asked him on some of the critical hotspots in the world, Russia, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, about what strategies would he envision advocating with the president, he really could enunciate none. So I'm afraid that he would not be someone who would seek to break the president's worst instincts, but actually to facilitate them.
But do you think he'll still be confirmed on the Senate floor, even if he's rejected in your committee?
Well, look, you know, Republicans have a majority in the Senate. If all of them line up and vote for him, he'd be confirmed. I don't know what Democrats would seek to vote for him, but I think he's going to have a tough time in the Foreign Relations Committee.
In the committee he will, but I assume some Democrats, maybe some red state Democrats in the Senate will vote to confirm him. We'll see where that goes. I know you and your colleagues were briefed on the Trump administration's strategy towards Syria. There's a lot of disappointment. Lindsey Graham, among others, emerged from that closed-door briefing very disappointed. Listen to what he said.
Everything in that briefing made me more worried, not less. This makes no sense to me. I am very unnerved by what I hear and what I see, and I think President Trump's been a good commander-in-chief, but when it comes to Syria, I think he's going down a very dangerous path.
What was your takeaway from that closed-door briefing?
My takeaway is what I've said in public before, Wolf, that one of the major challenges we have with President Trump as he deals with critical issues throughout the world is that there is no strategy. You know, a military strike against Assad because of chemical weapons is not a strategy. He did that a year ago. It didn't stop Assad from using chemical weapons. A strike now, in and of itself, is not a strategy as to how do you stop the civil war, how do you stop the humanitarian disaster, how do you end up defeating the rest of ISIL, how do you ultimately bring for a negotiated agreement that isn't the Russians, the Iranians, and Turkey driving it and the future of Syria and the Middle East, but a international coalition at the United Nations where we have a role to play. So all of the elements of that, getting our partners to isolate Russia and Iran, who are the ones who embolden Assad, getting our Gulf partners to have some economic consequences on those countries as well as countries that are critically interested in what happens in Syria. That's a strategy. But what I think Lindsey Graham is speaking to is what we heard, without getting into the specifics, is that there is no strategy.
Well, you think that Iran and Russia are the big winners in Syria, that they're really in charge together with the Bashar al-Assad regime, and the U.S. has lost?
Absolutely. I mean, look, Russia is now a major foothold. Iran has been building up resources within Syria, ballistic missiles, doing a whole host of other things, training, having troops, aiming it at Israel, our ally. And so the destabilization of the region is created by Russia and Iran emboldening Assad. Russia is now developing its bases there. Russia has a clear foothold. Iran has really created an opportunity for themselves. So I think they're the real winners so far.
Senator Menendez, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's it for me. The news continues on CNN right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Well, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke Baldwin. You are watching CNN on this Thursday afternoon, just hours before James Comey is set to speak with Jake Tapper today, 4 o'clock. His former deputy at the FBI is one step closer to facing a criminal investigation. Andrew McCabe was fired after an inspector general report indicated that he, quote unquote, lacked candor when discussing the FBI's investigation of the Clinton Foundation. So let's go first to Laura Jarrett. She has all the breaking details. Laura, what do you know?
Well, Brooke, our senior White House correspondent, Pamela Brown, has just broken this. According to a source familiar, the Inspector General's office here at the Justice Department made a criminal referral on Andrew McCabe to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the local U.S. Attorney's Office here in D.C. Now, we do not know exactly when this referral was made, but the Inspector General's office issued a scathing report on McCabe just last Friday, outlining a series of lies, both to former Director James Comey, to internal FBI investigators, as well as to the Inspector General's office itself. Now, McCabe completely denies all of these allegations, maintaining that he did nothing wrong. And the issue stems for a Wall Street Journal report, I should say, back in October of 2016. And McCabe, according to the Inspector General, authorized 2 FBI officials to speak with a reporter about that story. It was on the Clinton Foundation. It was an ongoing investigation at the time. And the Inspector General's office says that McCabe was not forthcoming about his role in approving officials to speak with a reporter about that story. But McCabe says he was one of the few people at the department who was actually able to do that, and he was authorized to do it. Now, FBI Director James Comey actually is in the mix here as well, because he says he was never told that McCabe was doing this. McCabe, again, denies that. A spokesman for McCabe, the Justice Department, and the U.S. Attorney's Office all declining to comment here, Brooke.
Okay, Laura Jarrett, thank you so much. We've just been jotting down notes as I bring in 2 more people to help walk us through what this means. Former federal prosecutors Jennifer Rogers and Daniel Goldman. Explain.
Well, a criminal referral means that some entity, in this case the Inspector General's office, thought there was a reason to potentially start a criminal investigation based on evidence that they had gathered. So now the District of Columbia U.S. Attorney's Office will take a look at this and see if any crimes have been committed here that warrant charging. It doesn't mean that there will be charges. It just means that the Inspector General's office has uncovered something that they feel like they need to pass on to potential, charging authorities.
So this is all based upon, as Laura just laid out, that report in 2016 that he allowed these 2 FBI officials to go on the, to go with a reporter and discuss, I guess, some findings with regard to the Hillary Clinton investigation. That is now coming back. Interesting. We have James Comey coming up with Jake Tapper in 2 hours. I'm sure he can comment, on, because it sounds like Comey said McCabe never told him at the time that he was doing this, although McCabe says otherwise.
Right, but I wouldn't expect Jim Comey to comment on an active investigation where he would be a witness to any potential criminal activity. But it's not, the conduct that they're investigating is not going to be in any relation to the actual investigation. It's going to be whether or not McCabe made false statements or lied under oath in connection to leaking or providing the information to the Wall Street Journal. I suppose it also could be something in connection to whether that information was confidential or grand jury information, which it would be a crime to provide, to disclose grand jury information to a reporter.
Okay. Let's move off of Andy McCabe and back over to the breaking news we have this afternoon on the Russia investigation, with prosecutors now pushing back against claims by President Trump's allies that the man leading the probe has, quote unquote, gone rogue and out of control. Here is just one example of the attacks on special counsel Robert Mueller.
We now have in this country what is a runaway investigation. It's spinning out of control. It's led by Mueller and his merry band of Trump-hating deep state sycophants. That's just a fact.
So we are now learning exactly how much oversight Robert Mueller has been under by his own boss, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. So let's go to our senior justice correspondent, Evan Perez, who has that piece of all of this. And so the hearing this morning, what exactly did it reveal?
Well, Brooke, I was in court there, and we were all waiting to see what exactly the argument from Paul Manafort's lawyers would be. They're trying to essentially put aside some of the indictments, some of the charges that have been filed against him, 12 counts here in the District of Columbia. And sort of looming over all of this is the accusation from President Trump and from others that this is a witch hunt. And for the first time, we heard the prosecutors today sort of describe what exactly Rod Rosenstein, the acting attorney general, is doing to oversee Robert Mueller. They said that he is in frequent contact with Robert Mueller and that everything Robert Mueller is doing is essentially with the say-so, with the approval of Rod Rosenstein. In the backdrop of all this, of course, is the August 2017 memo, which is something that President Trump has really, really gotten angry about, because it's in that memo that Rosenstein tells prosecutors that they can investigate whether Paul Manafort was in collusion with the Russian government. And so that memo, came obviously several months after Mueller takes over this case. And so the question before the judge today was, well, what happened in between May and August? And the judge seemed to kind of not really believe the Manafort argument that this showed that essentially that Mueller was going rogue or was not being carefully supervised. She hasn't ruled officially yet, Brooke, but I can tell you just from the read I had in court today, she doesn't seem to be buying the argument that Mueller has gone rogue.
Okay. Evan Perez, thank you for that. We are also learning about a warning to the president that he should keep an eye on Michael Cohen. The president was told by his that his longtime personal attorney may actually turn against him and join the growing list of former Trump allies now cooperating with federal investigators. That advice coming from the president's former divorce lawyer, guy by the name of Jay Goldberg, who once served as a U.S. attorney. Goldberg tells CNN that the president called him up on Friday and speculated that a person in Cohen's position would wear a wire, potentially adding, quote, anybody who is facing 30 years never stands up. Without exception, a person facing a prison term cooperates. Goldberg also said that Trump had no response to that. Cohen, as you well know, is under criminal investigation for his business dealings. If he were to flip on the president, it would be a stunning turnabout for a man who has proudly called himself Donald Trump's protector and fixer, as he told CNN back in 2011.
I protect Mr. Trump. That's what it is. If there's an issue that relates to Mr. Trump that is of concern to him, it's of course concern to me. And I will use my legal skills within which to protect Mr. Trump to the best of my ability.
Jennifer and Daniel are back with me. And so it's stunning. You have this, friend, lawyer giving advice who's coming on CNN, and going public on all of this. To you first, just would you agree his assessment if somebody's facing down 30 years that they will absolutely cooperate?
Well, not absolutely, right? It depends on a lot of factors. Cooperating is a very personal decision. It's based on whether you think you actually can stand to go to jail, what will happen to your family, put up against your loyalty to the person against whom you'd have to cooperate. It also will involve for him how much jeopardy he thinks that he's in for things that the government doesn't already know about. So he'll be facing some time if charges are brought, but there may be things out there that the government doesn't know about. And if you go in, you got to come clean about everything. So if there are other things out there that he doesn't want them to know and have to plead guilty to, that may be another reason.
But if he didn't do anything wrong, why is he talking about flipping in the first place?
You talking about the president?
The president.
Right. Well, that's the obvious question here. There would be no worry about Michael Cohen flipping if the president was not worried that he did something wrong. So that's the obvious inference here to be made. But I think when you are looking and trying to read the tea leaves about whether Michael Cohen is going to cooperate or not, pay attention to his discussion about his family. He has mentioned a couple times how difficult this is on his family, and it's just beginning. He just has now learned about this extensive investigation into him that he was unaware of before. if and when an indictment comes down, or if his lawyers are told about charges and he sees what his potential exposure is in terms of a jail sentence, then the family in that discussion starts to take on a much more prominent role. And it's always sort of a tell to us former prosecutors when you are hearing people talk about the difficulties that they have with their family and their family going through this. That's often an indication that someone is ready to cooperate.
That's what Gates said about
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. What about the notion that Mr. Goldberg mentioned about the potential for Cohen wearing a wire? True?
I would not expect that. As soon as something is
shaking your head
overt, that pretty much means it's blown, and everyone's thinking he might cooperate, so no one's talking to him anymore.
Right. I mean, the investigation is open now, and everybody knows about it. So you would never have somebody put a wire on when they know you're under investigation. Because, first of all, if you are suspicious of someone being under cooperating and wearing a wire, you often will say the opposite of an incriminating thing, which can be bad for the prosecution. So you would, in this case, you would not see Michael Cohen wear a wire.
Yeah, there are also legal rules. You're not allowed to go to represented parties, and President Trump is represented in these matters, so there are those considerations too.
Jennifer and Daniel, thank you both so very much on that. Meantime, President Trump's new national security advisor has just raised the prospect of a walkout in the middle of those high-stake talks with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This shedding some light on why the president said something similar.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting, when I'm there, is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
Arash Aramesh is our national security and foreign policy analyst. He worked as Middle East and Iran analyst at the Century Foundation, a prominent think tank in New York City and Washington, D.C. So, Ari, welcome. Nice to have you on.
Good to be with you.
All right. So why say this out loud, this notion of if it's not fruitful, I'm going to get up and walk out? Do you think this is some sort of, pre-planned to show who has the upper hand in such a high-pressure meeting?
Well, it's going back to who's got the bigger button, right? So, unfortunately, this is not exactly a meeting between George Herbert Walker Bush and Helmut Kohl. This is a meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. So a lot comes down to personality, a lot comes down to showmanship, and a lot of it comes down to fanfare. A lot of the substance, a lot of the actual important work is going to be done behind the scenes by sort of at the deputy level and also at principal level. You saw Mike Pompeo going to North Korea, sort of acting as a would-be Secretary of State. But on the other hand, the president is also getting advice from more hawkish elements within the White House, like John Bolton. And they're telling him, hey, Mr. President, if you come out too nice and too soft, Kim Jong-un might think your nuclear button is smaller than his. So you've got to play good cop, bad cop at the same time. So that's what he's doing. But again, we got to be careful about what we're getting into. We are setting, I think, our expectations way too high. Having said that, with all the criticism that goes towards President Trump and his foreign policy, being able to sit down with the North Koreans and getting something successful and substantive out of this would be a huge achievement.
Sure, and I think back to your point on John Bolton, I think, according to reports, he is the one who had floated this notion, right, of walking out of this meeting. But we don't know a lot about Kim. We think we know he could be quite unpredictable. How would he react to this move of if the president were to up and walk out and disrespect him?
We don't know, and that's the thing. The unpredictability in foreign policy is venomous. It's one of those things where you don't want to have. Now, that's why you have all these sort of on-the-ground meetings for months and months, for actually a couple of years. For instance, in the Iran nuclear deal, the U.S. delegation and the Iranians met in the country of Oman in the Persian Gulf and sort of set the groundwork, laid out the groundwork, and it was very secretive. But when the principals, Kerry from the U.S. and Zarif from Iran, met with other delegates from the P5+1, Germany, Russia, China, Britain and France, and so on and so forth, most of the substantive work had already been done. There were very few surprises. This is not the case here because you can brief President Trump if you can actually get to brief him, or Kim Jong-un for that matter, which we don't know much about him. But again, they're so unpredictable. You don't know exactly when push comes to shove how they're going to react. Secondly, this sort of rhetoric, even though seemed to have been unproductive, you know, that president said he's going to destroy North Korea, or Kim Jong-un is going to face fire and fury. On the other hand, it seems
that was some months ago. It seems like some of this conversation has changed, right? Trying for this diplomacy, getting seats at the table. We know everything's being negotiated. And again, the president in the last couple of days even saying maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't happen. But we're going to continue the conversations because this is obviously a huge, huge meeting to potentially take place. Arieh Ramesh, thank you so very much for weighing in on that. I want to move on to this just absolutely horrific story. The Southwest plane, the hero firefighter here who helped pull that passenger as she was getting sucked out of that plane window. He spoke out today as we're learning how that mother of two died after the engine exploded. Also, he is the sitting president, yet a number of Republican lawmakers are not ready to say whether they would support President Trump for re-election. In fact, why one senator says it's not a given the president will even run. And anytime the president speaks to reporters, it's always a surreal experience. Chris Cillizza analyzing the patterns from a Trump news conference. Stay with me.
What pushes us further than our best?
have released the cause of death for Southwest Airlines passenger Jennifer Riordan. They say she died from blunt impact trauma of the head, neck, and torso. Her death is being ruled accidental. One of the passengers who fought hard to save her, this married mother of two from New Mexico, is speaking out. Texas firefighter Andrew Needham helped pull her back into the plane after that window had shattered. He spoke emotionally about what happened and how he reacted so quickly.
Strong. I never was in fear of my life. I'm sure my family could speak otherwise, but I'm trained for emergency situations, and that's just exactly what it was. Just thankful, you know. So again, my heart goes out to Jennifer and her family, and I can't imagine what they're going through. She had 2 kids and a loving husband and a community around her that loved her. So my heart is broken for them, and I just pray that they find comfort, they find healing, whatever that may be, or however they seek it. But time will heal.
Wow. Meantime, the flight's hero pilot, Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, issued a joint statement shrugging off all of the praise she's been receiving by saying this, quote, "We all feel we were simply doing our jobs. Our hearts are heavy. On behalf of the entire crew, we appreciate the outpouring of support from the public and our co-workers as we all reflect on one family's profound loss." On the heels of Southwest ordering an inspection of its engines, the FAA says it will order certain engines to be inspected and that ultrasonic inspections be conducted on fan blades. Jennifer Riordan was sitting next to a window that overlooked the plane's engine. She was seated with her seatbelt on in row 14, and seated in that very same row was my next guest, Holly Mackey, who desperately tried to hold on to her. So Holly, thank you so much for being with me, and of course all of our thoughts go out to Jennifer and her family at this time. I have to ask, just in the last 48 hours, Holly, how many times have you thought that could have been me?
Yeah, I've thought it many times. Oftentimes I take the window seat on long flights so I can sleep. So I think many of us do. So you just never know where you're going to be sitting on the flight.
And take us back. So the window breaks. How do you notice that the window breaks? Is it you see it, you hear it, and describe just everything that happened from there?
Yeah. Everything was very fast. You know, we heard the sound, and it was very loud, of course, in our row because it was right there, and we had just been told to stay in our seats with our seat belts on because there was some turbulence, and so the sound and the accident was all at the same time. So when I looked over to see what was going on and if the people I was sitting with were okay, it was all somewhat instantaneous. And so, you know, I immediately jumped over to try to help Jennifer, and the girl sitting next to me did as well, and we weren't strong enough. But quite a bit of time passed between then and when the flight attendants were able to start checking the rows and come back and notice that we were in distress and that we needed help, because they had to, of course, make sure that they were safe and had their oxygen, and then there were a number of passengers who needed help in between us. But the sound was so loud that yelling for help nobody could hear. And a number of people, particularly right behind us in row 15, they were so helpful, trying to help us get attention because you couldn't see. The way that the plane is set up, you can't see. So really we had to make some decisions on what to do, and we thought it would be best to stay as calm as possible and just stay with Jennifer and be there for her so she wasn't alone.
Were you at all speaking to her. I don't know if she was conscious at all. I mean, I understand she was out that window for some 20 minutes, though I'm sure that felt like a blink when you have no idea if your life is ending. Can you tell me more about that?
No, we didn't speak to her. She wouldn't have been able to hear us. I had pulled the girl next to me in and tucked my arm around her from my side. We had there was still some pulling, and she was so light. We weren't sure if we should unbuckle and try to move to the back. One of my colleagues, Amy Serafini, had been trying to get me to unbuckle to move back, and she didn't understand why I wasn't, and she didn't realize that the younger child was there. So I was afraid if I unbuckled the child that she was so small that she would get sucked over, so I decided to stay. And so I put my hand on the small of Jennifer's back so she wasn't alone, but she wouldn't have heard us talking to her.
I want to ask about this hero pilot in a second, but I was talking first, Holly, to a passenger yesterday, and he said a lot of people in that blink of an eye thinking that was it. You know, we're reaching out to loved ones, trying to get on the Wi-Fi on the plane. What was going through your mind?
Well, I didn't think to do that. I always text my family before I get on flights, and we're very open. They know I love them, and they know that the work that I do is very important to me and why I do it. But also, I had a child right next to me who was scared and cold and didn't know what was going on. And I had another woman next to me who was in incredible distress. So in that respect, my family would understand. And I also knew that there were very few of us who could actually see what was happening. So perhaps had I been in another row or not known what was going on, I might have done that. But ultimately, I thought, you know, if we're going down, then I'm very much at peace with my family and friends knowing just how much I love them.
Just last quickly, you have a couple of words for this Tammy Jo Schultz, this hero pilot?
Yeah, she was amazing, and now I've heard that she's said that, you know, she was just doing her job. But I mean, if that's doing your job, then I mean, there's not praise enough. And also for Andrew and Tim and Peggy, you know, I mean, people do remarkable things under pressure, and
they do.
And there were so many other people, the whole plane, and children who were scared, who stayed calm, and mothers and fathers and perfect strangers who helped keep everybody calm. It was really an entire plane full of people working together in a very, very frightening situation.
Holly Mackey, we wish you well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you imagine? Coming up next, it is a public war of words between the president and his fired FBI director as James Comey rolls out his tell-all book. And this afternoon, Comey faces Jake Tapper. We are now learning how the president is dealing with the book tour behind the scenes. Jake joins me live next.
Today, you have heard from
Breaking news, CNN has just learned that the Justice Department is expected to make the Comey memos available to Congress. CNN Justice reporter Laura Jarrett is with me now. Laura, when do you expect that to happen?
Well, that remains to be seen, Brooke. I'm told that the Justice Department is expected to make them available at some point later today. And there are at least 7 different memos that at least we're aware of, some of which contain classified information. So at this point, it's unclear whether the Justice Department will decide to make them available in redacted form for that classified information, or whether they'll provide them unredacted to Congress. Of course, various congressmen on Capitol Hill have said that they want them made public and they want them unredacted. Chuck Grassley said earlier to CNN today he thinks there's no reason that they shouldn't be out there. And this has really served as the latest touch point for Republicans on Capitol Hill in the midst of all of these different document fights with the Justice Department. And as we reported yesterday, Republican Chairman Goodlatte on the House Oversight Committee, or Judiciary Committee, I should say, rather, is prepared to serve the Justice Department with a subpoena. So if the Justice Department had opted not to provide these, you could imagine that would happen later this week, Brooke.
All right, Laura, thank you very much. Also just in, as Jake Tapper is getting ready to interview James Comey this afternoon, a White House official tells CNN that the president has, quote, weathered the fired FBI director, but the legal jeopardy involving his personal lawyer is, quote, consuming him. We are also told the president is pleased with how Republicans in the White House have tried to discredit Comey in recent weeks. So Jake Tapper is with me now. You have a big afternoon ahead of you.
Yeah, an hour and 25 minutes and 40 seconds.
Counting the time. In all of these interviews he's done so far, what's your takeaway?
A few. I mean, I've noticed a couple verbal crutches that he goes to. I hope he's not watching.
Like what?
So,
like what?
Well, for
Let's
instance,
talk about that.
It's possible. He says that a lot. It's possible. And, you know, I think that sometimes before he was an author, he was somebody who didn't deal with it's possible. He's somebody who dealt with there's evidence for this or there's no evidence for this. So I think that's something to be explored. He's also, when mistakes or accusations of mistakes are pointed out to him, he says, you know, it's possible that was a mistake. You know, I'm a human being. I make mistakes. And sometimes the inclination, I think, for most interviewers, you and me included, is, this person just acknowledged human frailty, so we can move on to the next question. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes there's things to be poked at.
You going to do a little bit of that?
We'll see. We'll see.
Okay.
The hope is to ask. I mean, there have been some excellent interviewers that have already had a shot with him. George Stephanopoulos, Savannah Guthrie, Terry Gross, etc. So my hope is to ask some questions that have not been asked.
Sure, and there's also been more information that's been dropping, right, in the last couple of days. The latest, which Laura Jarrett was just reporting on, this whole Inspector General report, then on McCabe, who was Comey's number 2, that the matter that he was involved in, dating back to 2016, the Wall Street Journal reporter and the 2 FBI agents, that will be referred as a criminal matter. And I think Comey was asked about that earlier in the week. And I would imagine because it's an active investigation, he can't comment.
Well, he's commented to the Inspector General. I mean, he's in the Inspector General report. He has not been asked about the criminal referral because that just happened. So I think there is something to ask about that. Also, the fact is that Andrew McCabe, who is now accused of basically lying, technically it's lacking candor, but lying to Comey, to investigators, and to others about this leak that he authorized, according to the Inspector General, confirming the existence of a probe into the Clinton Foundation, doing that to protect his own reputation, not the public's right to know or the institution of the FBI. I think a good question is, and I'm not saying I'm going to ask it or not, but a good question might be, does that reflect on you? You're the one that made him your deputy.
So that's one potential question. Just lastly, and you talked about the whole it's possible, what question or two have you felt haven't had concrete answers yet?
I'm not going to...
I mean, give me a little something.
I'm not going to tell you the questions I'm going to ask.
I mean, if one were to be sitting in front of James Comey in an hour and 20 minutes...
He has very smart people around him who are, I'm sure, watching right now, who are saying, Tapper's going to ask. Mm-hmm. I already gave a tip about that last one, but I'll tell you...
He's in the cab. He's on his way.
He has been asked a lot about, didn't you throw the election to Hillary Clinton? How could you have done that?
Right.
Why did you do this for her probe, but not for the Russia probe? He's been asked that a lot. He's also been asked about, don't you demean yourself when you go after Trump's skin and his hair? And he's already on The View. Also, that was another good interview. They did a great job on The View. He conceded the point and said if he could do it over again, he wouldn't include that stuff. So I'm not going to ask those questions. There's a tip. Those questions I'm not going to ask.
Okay.
But we got 25 minutes with him. We've got a lot to ask about. The news guys are being generous this afternoon with the McCabe news, with the news about the Comey memos. There's some news dropping on Bloomberg right now about Manafort. We got a lot to talk about.
I cannot wait to watch at 4 o'clock Eastern time on the dot.
Kind.
I mean, I like you.
You're such
so
a,
there
you're
you
such
have
a
that.
kind person.
Make sure you tune in to Jake's interview. You see, as though it's not enough to see the man live on television, we made a graphic for you, the James Comey interview on the lead.
And by
4
the way,
o'clock.
I purposely wore the tie from the promo, just so so people would think consistency.
Jake Tapper. Well done. Tapper, good luck. Thank you so much. We have News CNN reporting on a stunning revelation. More than 24 House and Senate Republicans not yet ready to endorse President Donald Trump's bid for a second term. One going as far as to say he's not even sure Trump will run. We'll be right back.
On the new season of Parts Unknown.
President Trump's 2020 re-election bid facing a snag instead of a slam dunk when it comes to his fellow Republicans. The president is in gear, hiring a campaign manager, holding rallies, and yet plenty of Republican lawmakers up on Capitol Hill appear reluctant to endorse his 2020 re-election campaign.
I have no idea who's going to run for president in 2020. And I'm not about to say who I would support for that. So we have no idea who's going to run. Whether the president runs again or not, I think is very questionable.
But just today, one Republican senator says Trump can count on him. He is Senator Lindsey Graham, and he tweeted, as to the 2020 presidential race, I believe President Trump will run for re-election, and I intend to support him. Let's talk it over with David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida. David Jolly, nice to have you on.
Good to be with you, Brooke.
Lindsey Graham aside, Congressman, what is up with the Republican reluctance to get behind Trump for 2020? I mean, isn't it sort of automatic that they, endorse their party's sitting president?
Look, it should be, and historically it has been, but this is 2016 all over again. You have down-ballot Republicans still unsure about how closely to align or embrace Donald Trump, and there are several reasons behind it, Brooke. First is, it is a net negative to be aligned with Donald Trump. Look, among the base, of course, that solidifies your base, but the reality is among soft Republicans, independents, and Democrats, it is a net negative to embrace Donald Trump. Secondly, this far out, members are wrestling with whether or not this might be a president under indictment, or at least some form of deferred indictment before 2020. And third, whether or not he faces a primary challenge. I've been pretty open. There's a group of Republicans that continue to softly organize a primary challenge to Donald Trump. We don't know who that alternative might be, but the reality is a lot of these members of Congress and senators may be facing a choice about a primary to Donald Trump, and so they're keeping their powder dry.
How likely do you think that really might be?
Oh, I think it's going to happen, without question.
You do.
No question at all. It's going to happen. The question is, who is the candidate?
Who is it? There we go. Who is it?
No, I think no decisions have been made, but of course you've got to look at people like John Kasich. You have to look at Jeff Flake, Ben Sasse, those types. But if it's not a sitting governor or a sitting senator, you will see something akin to 1992 when Pat Buchanan challenged George Bush. And what I always say is this. The history shows that a primary challenge to Trump will be unsuccessful. But if people like me cannot create a landing spot within the Republican Party for reasonable Republicans, an alternative to Trump, then that party is lost, and where do people like me go? Right now, there's nowhere else to go. So you're going to see an alternative to Trump emerge in 2020, and I think that's the reticence you're hearing in some of the answers to Manu when he asks these questions.
Right, Manu Raju was the one tracking all these members of Congress down. What about the alternative to the alternative, Congressman Jolly, which is, you listen to Senator Corker. He says he's not entirely sure Trump will even run for re-election. Yeah. Why do you think Corker's even floating that out there?
Because the man, Donald Trump, who is defined by nothing more than his own ego, cannot risk going out a loser. And so I think there's a theory out there that I would subscribe to that would say Donald Trump will declare victory in 2020, say he drained the swamp, he fixed everything Obama broke, and he's going back to New York to make money. It allows him to go out a winner, and a lot of these legal troubles fade into history if he can survive that long.
David Jolly, we shall see. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Brooke. Thank you.
Coming up, famous musician here, listen to me, a magician, never supposed to reveal their secrets, but that is precisely what David Copperfield has been forced to do, what the illusionist just told a Las Vegas courtroom.
This is Lobster Fest at Red Lobster, with exciting new dishes like dueling lobster tails and lobster truffle mac and cheese. Classics like Lobster Lover's Dream are here too. So enjoy these 10 lobster-licious dishes now, because Lobster Fest ends April 22nd.
Running a business means I can't waste time, especially when I'm hiring.
He is billed as the greatest illusionist of our time, but magician David Copperfield has been forced to reveal one of his trade secrets in a Las Vegas courtroom. Copperfield and the MGM Grand are being sued by a British tourist who says he suffered permanent brain injury while participating in the lucky number 13 illusion. This was back in 2013. On the witness stand in the civil trial against him, Copperfield explained in open court how his trademark trick works.
You were like a horse with blinders on. You said tunnel vision. Is that what you meant by that?
I meant focusing, tunnel vision, only thinking about the audience going through the space to make sure it was clear.
You weren't thinking about, you weren't noticing everything. Your peripherals weren't in use at that time.
I was looking for the tape, the cut, the things, all those things that I focused on.
I see that we are going to be doing this for a very long time because you just want to keep doing that. And how many times can I ask the judge to instruct you? Really?
Next question.
Judge should move to strike.
Next question.
This is incredible. Ashley Banfield, host of HLN's Crime and Justice with Ashley Banfield. I mean, he doesn't want to give up the special sauce.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to.
Why is this such a huge deal?
So it's a big deal because otherwise this would be a personal injury story. We would never give it the light of day. But it's David Copperfield. Of course. And this magic show that he has in Vegas is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And magic, as we all know from our birthday parties when we were 8, is a big deal for a lot of people. And you don't give up the secrets of the tricks. Some of these tricks are really labyrinthian and intricate. And the one that he's got is the finale. So it is the biggest trick that he has.
This is when all, like, the participants, he gets people to come up on, it starts on stage.
13 of them.
13 of them, and then poof, they're in the back of the theater.
In about a minute to a minute 20, they go from being on this raised platform that's circled with a barrier, a sheet of some kind, and you cannot see anything beneath the barrier. You can't see any little feet coming off the barrier. What they have coughed up on this trick is something I think we already all know. They don't really disappear, Brooke.
They don't?
I'm sorry.
Stop it.
Santa Claus is at issue as well here, too. But they end up in the back of the theater. They run through a labyrinthian tunnel, throughout the theater to get to the back of the theater. But for the audience, they never see these feet getting off this raised platform.
So it's like, how do they do that?
How do they do that? So that, by the way, he did not cough that up yet.
He's back in court next week. We'll see if he gives up the special sauce then. Let us know. Ashley Banfield, thank you so very much. Next here, back to our breaking news in just an hour before James Comey talks to Jake Tapper, his former deputy at the FBI, one step closer to facing a criminal investigation. We're going to talk about Andrew McCabe next. And is the president's lawyer about to flip? Why one of President Trump's former lawyers is warning him, no doubt, Michael Cohen will roll.
We knew Angie's List had reviews of home pro.
I'm Brooke Baldwin. Thanks for being with me here on this Thursday afternoon. We have breaking news on two huge stories, both about the FBI. One, the memos fired FBI Director James Comey wrote on his interactions with President Trump are headed to Congress today. Remember that pledge of loyalty the president denied he ever asked? And the pending release is happening just as we're getting new details on Comey's former deputy at the FBI, Andrew McCabe. McCabe is now one step closer to possibly facing a criminal investigation. McCabe was fired last month, just days before retiring from the FBI after his 21 years at the agency. So I have Laura Jarrett and Pamela Brown standing by for those breaking details. Pamela, first to you on Andy McCabe. Tell me more about this case.
So, Brooke, we have learned that the Justice Department Inspector General has sent a criminal referral to the top prosecutor in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office on Andrew McCabe in the wake of this scathing IG report that was just released last week that laid out the case that McCabe had lied to investigators and his former boss, James Comey, on at least 4 occasions, including 3 times under oath. So what's happening here is the Inspector General is now asking investigators, prosecutors with the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office to consider possible criminal charges against McCabe. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that is going to happen. As you'll recall, Brooke, there was a criminal referral on the Clinton email server. The FBI looked into it. No charges were pressed. So in this case, what would happen is the D.C. prosecutor would look at the facts of the case and then make a decision based on the findings. But this report, this scathing report on Andrew McCabe, was the basis for his firing last month. He has denied that he ever misled investigators. In fact, with James Comey, he said that he did tell him that he was authorizing the disclosure of information to the Wall Street Journal in an article about the Clinton Foundation. Comey told investigators that that was not the case. You'll recall just yesterday, Comey on The View said that good people lie. Andrew McCabe lied, according to the IG, and then Andrew McCabe's team released a statement saying essentially that the IG report was not based on facts and evidence, and they are standing by their story that Andrew McCabe did not mislead investigators. It is not that unusual, Brooke, for context here, for a criminal referral to happen in the wake of an IG report. I think that is important to note, but it's certainly serious as well, even though it's not unusual, because you have a group of what are supposed to be nonpartisan, non-biased lawyers who are referring this to prosecutors to consider potential criminal charges, and we're dealing with the former deputy director of the FBI here, Brooke.
Right. And you brought up Comey and his role in all of this. Just a reminder to everyone, he's sitting down with Jake in 60 minutes from now. Meantime, Laura Jarrett, to you on these Comey memos, remind us what they are and when lawmakers will actually be able to see them.
So there are at least 7 different memos, at least that we're aware of. And the issue is that some of them arguably contain classified information. They're James Comey's contemporaneous notes from different interactions that he had with President Trump, and he memorialized them. And there's also an issue of whether they could have been part of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Several different outlets, including CNN and others, had tried to get our hands on the Comey memos, and we sued in court for them, and we lost. And the judge said they're part of Mueller's investigation. They have to stay secret for now. But the Justice Department is prepared, I am told, according to a source, to make them available to Congress, whether they're going to be provided completely unredacted or they'll be provided in a redacted form. It remains to be seen. But as CNN's Manu Raju reported yesterday, members of Congress say they need to be made public and are prepared to hit the Justice Department with a subpoena if they do not hand them over, Brooke.
All right, Laura, thank you very much. Let's get to the legal experts and their analysis of what we just heard and more. With me now, CNN legal analyst and former lawyer for the Trump campaign deputy, Rick Gates. He is Shan Wu. And Kim Whaley, who served as Associate Independent Counsel in the Whitewater investigation. So great to have both of you on. And Kim, let me just start with you on what we just heard from Pam with regard to the former deputy over at the FBI, Andy McCabe. So you heard Pam point out that he could face criminal charges and that this is not all entirely unusual. What are considerations here moving forward?
Well, at this point, it looks like it's being sent over to the Justice Department to actually do a more
careful factual investigation as to whether there is potentially a crime here. It's not dissimilar to what's happening in the Mueller investigation with respect to other individuals. And then they'll make a determination as to whether there's something to move forward to on from a criminal standpoint. I mean, I think hopefully what we're seeing is equal opportunity justice here, that these decisions are being made based on the facts and the law and not based on political affiliations. And I think it's important for the public to hear that the Justice Department needs to function independent of the political process.
Okay, let me move off of that. We'll watch that, of course, as it travels forward. But let's talk about the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen. And Shan, this is for you, because we know the president's former divorce lawyer, Jay Goldberg, was actually called up, so he says, by the president, and was asked for advice, and that he told the president that Cohen is likely to flip under criminal investigation, especially if you're looking down 30 years in prison. What do you make of Jay Goldberg's warning, and do you think that that's a fair conclusion?
I think that's a fair concern to have. I think Goldberg knows his former client well, and that probably the best way to get advice to the president is through the media. It's absolutely true that anybody facing any criminal investigation is under a tremendous amount of pressure. And this is an unusually aggressive, unusually high-pressure situation. The fact that they executed a search warrant on a lawyer's office, highly aggressive tactic, very intrusive, and that really ratchets up the pressure on Mr. Cohen.
But if you're saying he's using the media to try to talk to the president, the guy's on the phone with the president. Why is he telling the public about his conversation, do you think?
My speculation there would be that he knows that when he goes out into the public, that the president likes to watch the media, and the more amplification he gets, the more effective it may be.
Gotcha. Kim, this lawyer, Goldberg, who used to be a U.S. attorney, told our Gloria Borger, quote, anybody who is facing 30 years never stands up. Without exception, a person facing a prison term cooperates. We know he has a family. He's mentioned that recently. Obviously, I have to imagine that comes into play here. What is the average flip rate in these kinds of court cases?
Well, I don't know in terms of empirically what the answer to that is, but what I do think is interesting is, of course, there are two issues here. One has to do with whether Mr. Cohen has personal criminal liability, and if that's the case, he can make whatever deals offered for him personally. The other question is whether flipping means he's got information that is going to implicate the President of the United States, and I think that's an extraordinary conversation to be having. Like, if there's nothing to hide on from this president's standpoint, this is irrelevant information, and Mr. Cohen will go forward with respect to his own personal criminal liability, and the president's out of it. So,
right, the inference. Let me hammer home on the point I think you're making. The inference, if he's having a conversation with the president about flipping, that then would mean the president did something wrong.
Right. Otherwise, it's not an issue. I mean, right. It doesn't really matter. It's beside the point. I think it's absolutely astonishing as a matter of what's happening at the upper echelons of our government on both sides of the aisle right now, that we're having a conversation as to what Mr. Cohen's decision making with respect to his familial obligations are if he were to be given the opportunity to turn coat and give evidence with respect to the president's criminal liability. I mean, that's astonishing. We all should be concerned that anyone in that kind of position could even potentially be flipping in order to put the president in some kind of jeopardy, or that he'd have information that could put the president in some kind of jeopardy. That has implications for democracy, not just this president.
Yeah. Shan, on that, and we know, as we pointed out, you served on the legal team representing Rick Gates, who was cooperating with investigators, and that is an entirely separate issue and a separate investigation. But can you just help us explain? I don't know how much you can say about that specifically, but when you are dealing with a client who is considering cooperating or flipping, what are the considerations? What is one thinking about as to whether or not they should roll?
The most important consideration is that the client has to be 100% honest, understand what they're getting into. I can't speak about the Gates matter because that's confidential and it's privileged, but generally speaking, the client must be very clear that if you choose to cooperate, it's like being pregnant. There's not such a thing as being a little bit pregnant. You either are or you aren't. So if you cooperate, everything is going to be an open book. And to the point made earlier about the flipping issue, simply the fact of cooperation doesn't necessarily, of course, mean that you have criminally culpable information against the president, but rather that he is agreeing to cooperate rather than raising the shield of the Fifth Amendment. And then it's really up to the prosecutors to determine whether that information he has to give is going to be helpful in terms of criminal liability or not.
How do you, given Gates cooperating, a couple other former Trump associates cooperating, then now the consideration that, you know, maybe, who knows, but maybe Cohen could be cooperating. Kim, how would this sit on someone such as the president?
Well, I think for the president, if I were advising the president, I would tell him that he really needs, as other lawyers have told him, to ratchet down, stop the public commenting. And with regard to one of the pieces of advice given to him, which is to not sit down with a special counsel, I think that's right. For most politicians, yes, I think for most politicians that's wrong, because if they refuse to sit down, it looks suspicious. They may get a grand jury subpoena. They may have to invoke the Fifth Amendment, which looks terrible. But he is not most politicians, so I don't think that would bother him.
All right, Shannon, Kim, thank you so much. And we're talking about this former divorce lawyer of the president's, Jay Goldberg. He will be on tonight at 7 o'clock with Aaron Burnett here on CNN, so definitely don't miss that conversation. Coming up next, President Trump reportedly is consumed by the news about Michael Cohen. We have new details about the White House's thinking with regard to that case. And Senator Tammy Duckworth making history, bringing her baby to the Senate floor just moments ago. There they are. You will hear what she had to go through to get the rules changed to allow for this. And breaking news on Mike Pompeo's nomination to become Secretary of State. We have just learned a key Democratic senator will now vote yes. Stay with me. His nomination to become the next Secretary of State. We have just learned a key Democratic senator will vote yes. With me now, Dana Bash, CNN's chief political correspondent. Dana, that senator is Heidi Heitkamp. Why is she saying yes?
35.8%. That is the reason she is saying yes, because that is the percentage that Donald Trump won her state in 2016. And she is, as you said, a Democrat. And if she wants to win re-election in November, it is probably not the greatest political move, Brooke, to say, no, Mr. President, I am not going to give you the Secretary of State that you want. So that, in a nutshell, is the big reason, really the only reason why she is doing what she's doing, and the reason why it is very likely, I would even go so far as to say probable, that we are going to see similar announcements from Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who also is from a very red state, very pro-Trump state, where the president also won by more than 30 points. So go ahead.
Sorry. What about Rand Paul? We heard the president. He hasn't disappointed me in the past, or to that effect. Yesterday, he met with Mike Pompeo today. What are you thinking?
You know, Rand Paul is different. For Rand Paul, this is not an electoral question. Obviously, it's not a party question, because unlike Heidi Heitkamp, Rand Paul is a fellow Republican of the president's. For Rand Paul, this is a very specific role that oversees issues that, in terms of his principle, he has been a long time sort of opponent of, and somebody who is outspoken on issues like just big picture interventionism, concerned about the things that Pompeo has known about and worked through at the CIA in terms of intelligence, and Rand Paul's estimation, overreach in terms of civil liberties. So for him, it is a purely principled issue and question. And so it'd be interesting to see, Brooke, if the president is able to kind of twist his arm to make the argument that, look, I, the president, need in this position somebody who I can trust and who the world knows I have a good relationship with, so he can represent me. So far, it doesn't seem like that's an argument that holds sway over Rand Paul. But can I just quickly go back to the Heidi Heitkamp thing and why this matters? And it is because we are going to see a vote in the Foreign Relations Committee on Monday that nobody thinks is going to go through in a positive way. So what that means is that the majority leader is almost certainly going to take the nomination of Mike Pompeo to be Secretary of State to the floor. And so it's going to be up to a few Democrats to give the president this vote. That's why Heidi Heitkamp and her decision to cross party lines is so critical, and why we're looking to see if a few others do the same.
Got it. So that's Monday. How about in 45 minutes from now? We've got James Comey on the air being interviewed by Jake Tapper. We know a White House official is telling CNN that the president has, quote unquote, weathered the fired FBI director, right, and all of the TV appearances. But the legal jeopardy involving his personal lawyer is, quote, consuming him. We're also told the president is pleased with how Republicans in the White House have tried to discredit Comey in recent weeks. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is some terrific reporting from our colleague Jeff Zeleny about the fact that the president is not just sort of feeling like he weathered the Comey storm, but very upset and consumed, as you mentioned, with Michael Cohen. I mean, Michael Cohen, this is the ultimate question of loyalty, the ultimate question of somebody who the president has trusted with the most sensitive of issues for years, whether or not Michael Cohen will still have the president's back, even in the face of potentially really important, really devastating legal jeopardy. I mean, I make that assumption based on the fact that a federal judge and the president's Justice Department said it was okay to raid his home, or at least his hotel where he's staying, as well as his office. So it's very, very interesting. I will just say on the Comey thing, maybe the president feels okay because we haven't seen Jake Tapper interview James Comey yet.
He better be ready. Dana, thank you so much. Again, just a reminder to all of you, we are 40 minutes away from Jake's live interview with James Comey. Do not miss the tough questions he will have for the fired FBI director on the lead at the top of the hour. Stay right here. Next, the hero firefighter who helped pull that Southwest passenger from the window speaking out for the first time. You will hear that. And I'll talk live to a retired Navy pilot to explain incredible actions from the woman in the cockpit of that plane.
Half shot skin, flat white, extra.
and he spoke earlier today, fighting back tears when asked about the married mother of 2.
People aboard that plane, God put people on that plane for a reason, and you know, that's everybody acted, and everybody stood strong. There was a family that lost a loved one. You know, I feel for her family. I feel for her 2 kids, her husband, the community that she lived in. I can't imagine what they're going through.
The Southwest Hero pilot, Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, issued a statement saying that she was, quote, simply doing her job. With me now, Carrie Lorenz, the first female F-14 Tomcat fighter pilot in the U.S. Navy. Carrie, welcome, and thank you so much for your service.
Oh, it was a privilege, Brooke. Thank you very much.
So when you first found out that this hero pilot was a former Navy fighter pilot, your first thought was what?
Well, thankful that she was. That crew was they were both military members, and as you can see, very, very quickly, they defaulted to their training. They did what they had to do, even under extremis.
Landing, you know, she had flown all these F-18s. Landing an F-18 on that, you know, strip on an aircraft carrier, which is something I think she did over and over and over once upon a time. I know that is one of the toughest skills to master in military aviation. Can you just talk about how her background and her instincts came into play?
Absolutely. Well, this was a really unfortunate circumstance with a tragic ending. But when you're at altitude and your cockpit, the whole cabin decompresses like that, you default immediately to the training that you've received. And that's going through checklists. That's maintaining control. And one of the golden rules in military aviation that we as naval aviators learn is very simply aviate, navigate, communicate. And by that, the first thing you have to do, no matter what is happening, you have to fly the airplane and then figure out, where do we need to go? How do we get to where we need to go safely and as quickly as we can? And the final step in that is to communicate what it is that we are going to do. And as you can see, Captain Schultz very quickly did that. She took command, she started telling people what it was that she needed, and she handled it like the pro that she is.
This conversation, this clip, I want to play this. This is her conversation with the air traffic control. Listen to how cool and calm she is when you hear her tell the tower a piece of her plane is missing. Roll it.
Start looking for the airport. It's off to your right and slightly behind you there. And altitude is your discretion. Use caution for the downtown area.
Okay, could you have the medical meet us there on the runway as well? We've got injured passengers.
Injured passengers, okay, and is your airplane physically on fire?
Not fire, but part of it's missing. They said there was a hole and someone went out.
I'm sorry, you said there was a hole and somebody went out? Southwest 1380, it doesn't matter. We'll work it out there.
I would not have been so cool, calm, and collected. Let me just say that, Carrie.
Well, it's definitely a skill set and a mindset that to be a military pilot, you have to be able to compartmentalize very quickly. And when you're in extremis, when you're doing your job, there is no room for emotion. And at the end of the day, you have to have that ability to compartmentalize, to go through your checklist, to default again to that training so that you get not only yourself to where you need to go safely, but all those people who are counting on you as well.
Carrie Lorenz, thank you so very much. I appreciate it. And all of your hours and expertise. Coming up next here, the 2 African-American men arrested at a Philadelphia Starbucks. They are speaking out today for the very first time. This is the city's police commissioner personally apologizes for making the situation worse.
Today, you have heard from James Comey.
calls for a national boycott of Starbucks. Today, the two black men who were handcuffed and removed from a Starbucks for not buying something are breaking their silence. Rashawn Nelson and Dante Robinson say they went to a Starbucks for a business meeting, but within minutes of arriving, they were handcuffed by police and placed in the back of a squad car. Here is part of their interview from Good Morning America.
Initially, as soon as they approached us, they just said we have to leave. There was no question of, you know, was there a problem here between you guys and the manager? You know, what happened?
When you were arrested, did they tell you what you were being arrested for?
No, not at the time. He wasn't read any rights. Nothing. Just double lock, handcuffs behind our back, and escorted out and put into a squad car. I want to make sure that in this situation doesn't happen again. So what I want is for a young man or young men to not be traumatized by this and instead motivated, inspired. You know, this is something that has been going on for years and everyone's blind to it, but they know what's going on, if you get what I mean. And, you know, just really taking those actions and putting them into place and, you know, help people understand that it's not just a black people thing. This is a people thing. And that's exactly what we want to see out of this, and that's true change. So put action into place and stop using your words.
Not just a black people thing, but a people thing. Solomon Jones is with me. He is radio host for Philadelphia's Praise 107.9. Solomon, thank you so much. I know this has been a huge, huge topic for you on your show. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, it has. Yes, thanks for having me, Brooke. Appreciate it.
You got it. You know, listen, the thing that a lot jumped out at me listening to the interview with Robin this morning, but you know, in that interview, I mean, 2 minutes from when those guys sat down to when the manager called 911. 2 minutes.
Yeah. It really just reminds me of so many other incidents that have turned out worse than this one. Tamir Rice, the police officers pull up and in a matter of seconds, they shoot that little boy for playing with a toy gun. In this case, 2 minutes. They show up, and the men say in that interview that they didn't even know why the police were there, that they were saying to themselves, well, they can't be here for us because nobody's told us anything. And suddenly there's 6 police officers surrounding them. It really is a case of racial profiling in a neighborhood, Rittenhouse Square, that is a very rich neighborhood, a very white neighborhood, where we've had problems with stop and frisk, where only 3% of the people in that neighborhood are black, and yet 67% of those who are stopped by police in that neighborhood are black. And so this is an ongoing problem, and hopefully this is the beginning of some solutions, not only for this situation, but as Dante Robinson said, for many others like it.
On the solution piece, Solomon, we know that the Starbucks CEO has met with these 2 men. He has apologized face-to-face. He has called this reprehensible. We know they're shutting down 8,000 Starbucks stores at the end of May for racial bias training. Is that enough?
Yeah. No, because they need to be shutting down the stores now for racial bias training. You know, we've seen other videos where a white person was led into the restroom without buying anything, given the code, and a black person right behind him was not let into the restroom. So this is an ongoing problem, not just at Starbucks, but I think in many places where black people are profiled. And so until such time that we know that this manager is gone and will never come back, until such time that we know that the racial bias training has been done, until such time that we know that black people have been promoted into positions of management where they can make decisions around who goes, who stays, who gets in the bathroom, etc., I will not be satisfied. And I've been going to Starbucks for years, but I will be boycotting until such time that these conditions are met.
You closed your whole piece in the Philadelphia Daily News by writing, until Starbucks commits to treating my brothers like whole persons, I will boycott every one of their stores. You know, you talk about putting people of color in managerial positions. You know, I was looking at some of the numbers today. Starbucks touts its diversity. They say 66% of their workers are women, and that 43% are minorities. Solomon is boycotting a company where a number of their workers are people of color, are women. Is boycotting the most effective way to express your displeasure?
I think in a capitalistic society, boycotting is always the most effective way to express your displeasure, because when you can hit a company's bottom line, then that is a message that goes beyond just words, beyond just protests. It affects the company, and so I think it's always effective. But let me say this, that the way that systemic racism works is sort of like a chess game. No matter whether the piece is black or whether the piece is white, if it's a knight, it can only move in an L shape. If it's a bishop, it can only move diagonally. And so it doesn't matter if you have people in position that look like me, if the only thing that they can do is work within a system that is in itself racist. And so Starbucks needs to be having that training now, because apparently it is not working to have just people in positions where they can only do what the company policies, spoken and unspoken, say that they can do.
Solomon Jones, thank you for your voice. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up next, President Trump threatens to walk out of his meeting with Kim Jong-un if it doesn't go well, if it's not, his word, fruitful. This as North Korea reportedly makes a major concession before those talks. We'll get into that. Also, anytime the president speaks to reporters, it's always, shall we say, a surreal experience. Crystal Liza is up. He's analyzing the patterns from a Trump news conference.
Keith and Melissa live next to Melissa.
he likes a foe, and past administrations. Anytime he talks about North Korea, he essentially says, this should have already been solved. Every past president, every past administration did a poor job. I want to point out one other thing we've noticed. He always leaves things open-ended. Well, we may have a meeting. Maybe we won't have a meeting. We'll see what happens. Now, on we'll see what happens, check this out.
Unless they offer us a deal that we cannot refuse, I would not go back into TPP. We'll see what happens. I hope you're going to tell that caravan not to get up to the border. And I think they're doing that because as of 12 minutes ago, it was all being broken up. We'll see what happens. So we'll see what happens with the peace process. I'm very disappointed with the Attorney General, but we will see what happens. Something could happen with respect to the Paris Accord. We'll see what happens. As far as North Korea is concerned, I don't know. We'll see what happens. We're looking at it with great care, believe me, and we'll see what happens.
So, Brooke, will you ever have me back on the show? We'll see what happens.
See what happens. You know, there are videos online, linguists analyzing his speech. I've gone down dark, long rabbit holes on that. It's just sort of fascinating to look at. You know, Crystal is
weirdly, Brooke, just very quickly, weirdly for someone who is so sort of all over the place message-wise, he's incredibly on message about certain things. No collusion, electoral college, Democrats. We'll see what happens. We'll walk away, maybe we won't. It's like a mantra, and yet on other things, he's all over the map.
Totally. We'll see what happens. Chris Cillizza, thank you so much. Thank you.
See what you did there. Thank you.
President Trump's new national security advisor has just raised the prospect of a walkout in the middle of the high-stakes talk with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, set for May or June. The comment sheds some light on why the president said something similar.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting, when I'm there, is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
With me now, CNN's chief international correspondent, Christian Amanpour. And Christian, is it possible to say disrespectfully and walk out in the same sentence? Can that even happen? Is there diplomatic protocol for something like that?
Well, look, Brooke, it would be incredibly unusual for that to happen at that level, two heads of state. It would be very, very unusual for just a catastrophic sort of breakdown and a walkout, even if things are not successful. But I think what's clearly happening is that John Bolton, as you mentioned, who is in any event not one who particularly believes in the hard and arduous work of diplomacy and has, as you know, had a worldview that includes, you know, regime change in North Korea, in Iran, using military force and all the rest of it, may not be disposed to the very hard work that it takes to have the kind of negotiation that will be required to get any deal between the United States and North Korea. Just look at the Iran nuclear deal. That took 2 years of negotiations after months of secret talks, and that was kind of a smaller deal than the North Korean one will be because, of course, North Korea has nuclear weapons, Iran did not. And also you have a problem whereby potentially the word denuclearization means two different things to the North Korean leadership and to the United States and the West. They are actually maybe both talking about significantly different things about what exactly they hope to get out of this. And then finally, President Trump is a businessman who uses his art of the deal and his hardball negotiations to effect during his real estate deals. But when you have negotiations with heads of states who have a nuclear weapons program, there has to be a much more nuanced sort of relationship, and it can't just be a zero-sum game. In other words, for President Trump to win, or for the West to win, it doesn't necessarily mean that North Korea must be shown to lose. So a negotiation means that all sides can come out with a sort of win-win, even if it's not equal and the West gets what it wants, the other side must be made to believe that this is something that it can sell back home, that is palatable and actually can exist. So, you know, the idea of sort of walking out and all the rest, it seems to be setting up a scenario that if it's not going well, I'm going to be a tough guy and I'm going to show that it's not going to work.
All right, so this meeting's supposed to happen May, June, or maybe not at all, so says the president. Meantime, I have no segue for this. Christian, let's talk sex and love and Shanghai. Roll the clip.
mission is we want to find a beautiful dress for the date. What's the attractive? Is bright color. Okay.
So you think I have a good chance of getting a date?
Yeah, little V-neck.
I could open it more.
Unbuttoned.
There you go.
No.
No?
It's too much.
This is too much? Your face, I mean, you look horrified. It's just a little button.
We are good girl.
You're good girl?
Yes, we're good girl. I try to train them to be bad girl.
Bad girls?
Bad girl, yes.
Well, I'm a little bit shocked. They not only look younger, they act young.
Yes. They don't look like the adult women, right? But they are well educated. They work for the multinational company, have very decent pay.
Really?
Yes.
They're very naive.
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, look, here they come.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's gorgeous.
I want to ask you girls, do you think about romantic and love satisfaction? Do you feel you're missing something?
Yes. Everyone told us study very hard to go to a very good university, to get a very good job, but no one tell us that how to have a very good intimate relationship with the boys.
Christiane, living on the edge, unbuttoning your blouse. I mean, wow. What's the culture like there?
Well, you just heard it. It's really kind of sad, but it's the reality. You know, women have done so well in Shanghai. It is really going gangbusters. Women are at university, women are in business, women are millionaires in greater numbers than in any other part of China, and yet they have this big hole in their lives when it comes to knowing how to navigate their personal relationships. To the point that you saw, I was with a dating coach teaching girls how to dress, but beyond that, how to act, how to talk, how to, you know, just date a guy. And of course, this in a culture where choosing your own partner is not normal. They've had arranged marriages forever in China. And by the way, Brooke, the segue was China has a huge role to play in the North Korea-US talk.
Leave it to you with the segue, of course. We will not miss back-to-back episodes this Saturday night, Sex and Love with Christiane Amanpour, 10 o'clock Eastern and Pacific. Thank you so much. And we are now less than 10 minutes away from Jake's interview, live interview with fired FBI Director James Comey. Hear his response to the breaking news that his former number 2 is facing possible criminal charges. Do not go anywhere.
I wanted to get new blinds. I was talking with my
And historic moments ago on Capitol Hill, Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth arrived to cast a vote with her 10-day-old daughter by her side. The Senate unanimously decided last night to allow working moms on the Hill to bring their newborns to work. Senator is the first to give birth while in office as a senator, and our CNN congressional correspondent Sunlen Serfati is with me. I understand you got a chance to get a question in with her as she was heading in with her beautiful baby girl.
That's right, Brooke, and this is certainly not only a big moment for Senator Duckworth here today, but a big moment for the Senate as an institution. And I think Senator Duckworth really did say it best herself when she said, essentially to her fellow senators, welcome to the 21st century, which is certainly an acknowledgement that these long-standing Senate rules in the books really did have to be updated. Today, it was a first, the fact that she was allowed to bring her newborn on the floor to vote with her. This is something that leading up to yesterday, senators could not do. That was a rule that was on the books. That was a rule that they voted to change. And so myself, along with a few other reporters, did catch up with Senator Tammy Duckworth as she arrived on Capitol Hill today with that 10-day-old baby. Here's a little of what she had to say.
Senator, how does it feel to be here?
How are you? It feels great. It's about time.
How do you feel as a mom to be here with Miley?
I think it's historic. I just think it's amazing, and I want to thank all my colleagues for the unanimous consent vote that we can do this. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
She's pretty young to be making history.
She is. You know, hope we're not setting expectations too high for her.
And moments after that, she was welcomed onto the Senate floor to a round of applause from her fellow colleagues as she brought that baby on the floor and cast her vote. But Brooke, she had worked behind the scenes for months with many other senators to make this rule change happen, but not without hurdles. In fact, I heard from many senators that there was a lot of concern up here on Capitol Hill from her colleagues questioning, would she be changing diapers on the floor? Would there be a dress code for this baby? So certainly interesting that those concerns were still voiced as they made this rule change push. Brooke?
Love how you said it. Welcome to the 21st century. Sunlen, thank you so much. That does it for me. I'm Brooke Baldwin. We're going to send it to Jake Tapper. A very special edition of The Lead starts right now.
Welcome to this special edition of The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. By now, you have no doubt heard former FBI Director James Comey detailing his rise and his time as the nation's top law enforcement official and sounding the alarm about the future of America under President Trump. This week, he's been particularly candid in his criticism of the president, who has, of course, fired back, attacking Comey as a, quote, slimeball, even dubbing him Slippery James Comey. But right now, at a crucial moment in this very public war of words about very important issues, there is a lot of breaking news, with a source telling CNN that later today, the Department of Justice is expected to allow Congress to see Comey's memos detailing his interactions with President Trump, and another source saying that the Justice Department is looking at possible criminal charges against Comey's former deputy, Andrew McCabe, for lying about leaking. Amidst this barrage of major breaking news involving James Comey and the Department of Justice, we have with us today the former FBI director and the author of his new book, A Higher Loyalty, Truth, Lies, and Leadership. James Comey, welcome to The Lead. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me here, Jake.
So let's talk about this breaking news. CNN just breaking the story. The Justice Department Inspector General sending a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney in D.C. regarding your former deputy, Andrew McCabe. They did this after releasing a report concluding McCabe repeatedly lied to investigators and to you about a leak to the Wall Street Journal in which he confirmed, or he had people leak to the Wall Street Journal, confirming the existence of an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. If they ultimately bring a case against Andrew McCabe, would you be a witness for the prosecution?
Potentially. I don't know whether the reporting is accurate. I know it's CNN reporting, but I don't know it of my own accord. But sure, given that the IG's report reflects interactions that Andy McCabe had with me and other FBI senior executives, I could well be a witness.
You express a lot of horror in the book when public officials or even celebrities lie to investigators, whether David Petraeus or Scooter Libby.
Or Martha Stewart.
Martha Stewart.
Yeah.
So I would assume that you would be upset at Andrew McCabe. I haven't really heard you criticize him the same way you've criticized those others.
Well, I hope I didn't criticize them personally. I think it's very important.
No, the act, though.
Oh, sure. The act is one I take very seriously, and so does the Department of Justice. What's gone on so far has been the accountability mechanisms of the department working because it's a department that's committed to the truth. And so it's working. I don't know whether there's a criminal referral, what will happen, but that's part of accountability and examination of what the consequences should be if there was material lying.
But how do you feel about your former deputy, according to the Inspector General, lying to you, lying to investigators for a leak that the Inspector General said was only motivated to preserve his own reputation, having nothing to do with the FBI or the public's right to know?
They're conflicted. I like him very much as a person, but sometimes even good people do things they shouldn't do. I've read the report. I'm not the judge in the case. I'm not the discipline decision maker in the case. I think it is accountability mechanisms working, and they should work, because it's not acceptable in the FBI or the Justice Department for people to lack candor. It's something we take really seriously.
The Justice Department is also expected today to begin the process of letting Congress see your memos detailing your interactions with President Trump. Is that the right decision, to let Congress see them?
I don't know, because I don't know what considerations the department has taken into account. It's fine by me.
You don't care?
I don't care. I don't have any views on it. I'm totally fine with transparency. I've tried to be transparent throughout this, and I think what folks will see if they get to see the memos is I've been consistent since the very beginning, right after my encounters with President Trump, and I'm consistent in the book and try to be transparent in the book as well.
Senator Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, says that there are 7 memos. He says 4 of them are classified. Is that right?
I don't know, because I don't have the memos. I don't know exactly how many there are. Some may be memos, some may be emails. There's somewhere between 5 and 10. It may be 7, it may be 8. I don't remember. And I think some of them, I know when I created some of them, they were classified, but I don't know how many of that group.
One of them is, the classified one is obviously from when you told President Trump in Trump Tower about what was in that 2-page annex about the Steele dossier, the summary of what was in the Steele dossier. What would the other classified ones be about?
Well, I can't answer that if they're classified.
You can't even say the subject of them, terrorism?
Well, there were a number of conversations I had that related to our investigative responsibilities and that I considered classified at the time. And if I go beyond that, I'll be breaking the seal on them.
We're just learning that Bloomberg News is reporting that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein told President Trump that he is not a, quote, target of the Mueller investigation, of the Russia probe. At this point in the investigation, what might that mean, telling the president he's not a target?
I don't know what it means. It's a fairly standard part of any investigation, trying to decide whether a person you're encountering is a witness, a subject, or a target. A target is someone on whom the investigation, the grand jury, has developed significant evidence sufficient to charge. Witness is somebody who has nothing to do with any exposure, and a subject is everybody in the middle. So I don't know the context in which the Deputy Attorney General did that, but that's the general framework.
The President has obviously had a lot of words in response to you for the last year and change, especially this last week. He's called you a liar and a leaker. Our reporting says that a Republican who recently spoke with the President says that the President feels as though he has weathered your book tour. Has he weathered the book tour? Has he come out unscathed?
I have no idea. The book tour is not about the President. It's about my hope that I can be part of facilitating a conversation about our values. President Trump figures in that, obviously, because he's part of the stories I'm trying to tell to illustrate ethical leadership. Because it's not about him, I haven't thought about it in terms of whether he's weathering it or not weathering it.
The book's about President Trump to a great deal. I mean, there's a lot. I read the book. There's a lot in there about your time as a U.S. attorney, about your childhood. But there's a lot in there about President Trump, especially in terms of leadership. He's an example of how not to be a leader, in your view. He is the example of somebody who is a bully. And you talk throughout the book about how you hate bullies.
I think he is a counterpoint. That's why he's in there. I couldn't write about ethical leadership and illustrate it with stories without telling stories of someone I think fails to reflect the values of an ethical leader. So sure, he's 3 of the 14 chapters. It's an important part of the book. But all I meant is it's not a book about Donald Trump, and I hope very much it'll be useful long into the future beyond a Trump presidency.
You've leveled some very tough charges about him. You call him morally unfit. You call his presidency a forest fire. You say he's violating the rule of law. Do you think the nation would be better off if Hillary Clinton had won?
I can't answer that. That's something that hypothetical is too hard for me to go back in time and try and answer.
You paint a pretty dire picture of President Trump. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how you don't think the nation would be better off if Hillary Clinton had won.
Yeah, I don't think about it in those terms, though, Jake. I think we have the current president who was, in my view, legitimately elected, is serving as president. The question is he adhering to our values? He's clearly not. So what do we do about it? And I think the first thing we do is not get numb to it. When he calls for the jailing of private citizens in his tweets, don't shrug, but realize that's not okay, that's not normal.
It's interesting that you won't go as far to say that Hillary Clinton would be, the nation would be better off if Hillary were president, because you have called for the nation to respond to the challenge of Trump, in your view, by voting, presumably by voting against what he represents. Is that not a fair interpretation?
I actually think of it, maybe it's the same thing, but I think of it in terms of voting for something else, which is the core values of this country, which are more important than any policy dispute. So I don't care whether people find that in a Republican or a Democrat or neither. It's important that our leaders reflect those values, because that's all we are.
So you have spent decades building a reputation for being evidence-based, for being nonpartisan. The FBI is an organization that is supposed to be evidence-based and nonpartisan. Do you worry that by painting this stark portrait of President Trump and suggesting that the American people should vote for something other than the lack of values that he represents in your construct, that you are sullying both the brand of Comey and the brand of the FBI?
Yeah, I don't think so, and I certainly hope not, because I'm not criticizing President Trump because he's a Republican or because he has a certain view on taxes or immigration or anything else. I'm criticizing him on the grounds of values, which is at the center of the FBI, and something that should be at the center of all of our evaluations of our leaders. So I get that it's relevant to politics, but I see it as something actually more important than partisan politics.
Something you said to me in one of your interviews stood out. Quote, if you've been investigating something for almost a year and you don't have a general sense of where it's likely to end up, you should be fired because you're incompetent. You write something similar to that in the book, and it's you explaining why you wrote the letter, basically exonerating Hillary Clinton from criminal behavior before you had even interviewed her. But let's apply that same standard to the Mueller investigation. You oversaw the Russia investigation for almost 10 months. Do you have a general sense of how that investigation is going to end up?
In some respects, I did at the time, but not completely. I suspect that the team that's investigating it now has a general sense. I have no idea what that is. But again, it's a general feeling that on the current course and speed, we're likely to end up in this direction or that direction.
And where did you think it was going to end up? Did you think it was going to end up with people around President Trump being found guilty of conspiring, aiding and abetting with Russians?
I can't say. I've left that out of the book for reasons that should be obvious. I can't talk about classified information or sensitive investigative details, so I'm not going to say.
But your sense of where the investigation was headed is not classified. It's just your impression. And obviously the investigation has continued since then. Why won't you say? I mean, people want to know. You have left the impression that there's something there in your interviews. You have said, when asked, do the Russians have something on President Trump, you've said it's possible. It's possible, which is not a very FBI director answer, don't you think?
No, I think it's an honest and calibrated answer. Well, so I hope that's an FBI, I'm not the FBI director, but I hope that's an FBI director type answer.
Well, when you gave the press conference about Hillary Clinton in 2016 in the summer, you said, you didn't say she didn't lie, or you didn't say it's possible she lied. You said you found no evidence that she had lied. Mm-hmm. You found no evidence that she had that email server knowing that it was improper. But you're not using the same construct of there is evidence or there isn't evidence. You're saying it's possible. That leaves the impression for people that there might be stuff out there, that there might be evidence that President Trump is under the thumb of the Kremlin.
Yeah, but I see that, Jake, as you're asking me about two different things. I'm not going to talk about the investigation of possible cooperation between Americans and the Russian effort to influence our election. What you're asking about now is, why did I say what I said when people asked me whether I thought it was possible that the Russians had derogatory information on President Trump? I think it's unlikely, but I think it's possible.
But isn't that construct unfair to President Trump in a way? Because the question was if President Trump was compromised by the Russians. You say it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. I mean, it's possible there's life on other planets. We don't know. For you, somebody like you with your reputation, saying it's possible it's also possible that it's not true. Isn't that another way you could look at the same question?
Sure, but I'm not looking to the stars saying there might be green men out there. There's a reason I say it's possible. Two things struck me. One, the president's constantly bringing it up with me to deny it. And in my experience as an investigator, it's not an ironclad rule, but it's a striking thing when someone constantly brings up something to deny that you didn't ask about. And then second, I've always been struck in my encounters with him that he wouldn't criticize Vladimir Putin even in private, which struck me as odd. Now, those aren't definitive, those aren't conclusive facts, but the reason I'm saying it's possible is there are things that lead my common sense to believe it's possible.
But isn't that kind of cute? I mean, you're not saying that you have evidence of it, you're just saying it's possible. I mean, do you have evidence that President Trump has been compromised by the Russians? Have you seen evidence of it?
No, and I think I've said that throughout. I'm trying to be transparent as here's my reasoning. Here's why an honest answer has to be it's possible. Now, I'm not saying it's likely. In fact, I've said all along, and I'm repeating it to you here today, it's unlikely in my view, but it's possible.
So let's talk about the investigation and what you can talk about it. In January 2017, when you met with President Trump and you did that oral presentation of what's in that two-page memo summarizing the Steele dossier, we know from the book that you talked about these unverified allegations involving him and prostitutes. Did you brief him about any of the other things in the Steele dossier, claims that his associates, Michael Cohen or Paul Manafort, were potentially working with the Russians, or was it only about the prostitutes?
It was only about the salacious part of it.
Why? Why only about that?
Because that was the part that the leaders of the intelligence community agreed he needed to be told about, because we knew it and thought it was about to become public. And if it was true, we didn't know whether it was true, it would be important to let him know this as part of a defensive briefing.
While we're on the subject of the dossier, by the time you left, how much of it do you think you were able to either prove to be correct, verify, or debunk?
The work was still underway. I wouldn't be able to say anyway if I was still there, but the work was still underway when I was fired.
Some of it, is it fair to say that some of it you verified as true and some of it you debunked as false?
I think all I can say is a core part of it was consistent with lots of other intelligence, core part of it being the Russians are engaged in an orchestrated campaign to influence the American election.
Michael Cohen, I want to ask you about him. He's now under criminal investigation by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, your former job. CNN's reporting that one of President Trump's former lawyers is warning the president that Michael Cohen could flip. And also we're hearing, and lots of people have reported, that President Trump and his advisors are much more concerned about the investigation into Michael Cohen than they are into the Russia investigation. Put on your legal analyst hat for a second. Why might that be? Why would they be more worried about Michael Cohen than about Robert Mueller?
I'm going to resist putting on the legal analyst hat. You've got all these awesome legal analysts at CNN. I'm not one of them.
We know that Cohen's name is in the Steele dossier. We know that the FBI has been trying to verify whether or not the entire dossier is true or not. Is he vulnerable in the Russia investigation, Michael Cohen?
That's not something I can answer.
In the book, you detail several interactions with the president that made you uncomfortable. Ultimately, you accepted President Trump's dinner invitation. You promised honest loyalty. You later agreed that Michael Flynn, was a good man. Now, you write that your experience in high school gave you a, quote, lifelong hatred for bullies. Do you think President Trump is a bully, and do you hate him?
I definitely don't hate him. There are things he does that make me uncomfortable and I think are inappropriate, that are in some ways like a bully-like behavior, but I don't hate Donald Trump. I don't even dislike Donald Trump.
I want to ask you a devil's advocate question about President Trump. You were a person who privately briefed him about this salacious allegation involving prostitutes. Is it not possible that President Trump, when he asked for your loyalty, had in his mind the idea that here's an FBI director, the only FBI director I'm really familiar with is J. Edgar Hoover, and I know he blackmailed politicians all the time. Is it not possible that he thought he was asking for your loyalty because he was worried that you were going to drop all this incriminating information on him that may or may not have been true?
It's possible.
It's possible.
I'm only saying that because you said that.
I want to get clarity on something else that you said this week. You said this week that President Trump, quote, treats women like meat. Is that from some personal experience that you saw or heard about, or is that just from things that he has said?
Just from media, not from personal experience.
I want to ask specifically about, if you could put on your hat, your legal analyst hat. I'm going to ask you one more time.
Which I'm refusing to put on.
You're refusing to do. But to look at, I know you've been asked about the obstruction of justice charge, and you said it's possible that there's an obstruction of justice case to be made, specifically with firing you and asking you, after the meeting where he asked you to drop the Flynn matter. Look at the conspiracy matter, aiding and abetting, when I know collusion is not an actual criminal charge.
Good.
If you look at what there is there, we know the Russians hacked the Democrats. We know that at least 2 people in the Trump world, Papadopoulos and Trump Jr., were approached by people with Kremlin ties and told about dirt on Hillary Clinton. We know that there is an expression of a desire for that information. We know that 2 people in the Trump world reached out to Julian Assange. We know that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks published these emails, and we know that President Trump made a lot of hay out of those emails. First of all, am I missing anything? Is there anything else in the conspiracy that we don't know?
I can't answer that.
Of everything I just said, which is all in the public domain, is that enough for a conspiracy charge against anybody?
It's really not something I can answer. I would say this. You'd certainly, if you're the special prosecutor, want to understand those facts and any around them to try and make that analysis.
But is there a case there?
You don't want me to say it's possible again. It's possible, but I don't know.
You write in the book about your controversial decision to notify Congress that you were reopening the Clinton investigation just a few days before the election. You've been asked a lot about this, so I'm not going to ask the same questions other people have. But you did say you were thinking at the time, quote, if I hide this from the American people, she'll be illegitimate the moment she's elected. Didn't that happen except to Donald Trump? In other words, you didn't disclose, and I understand why you didn't, but you didn't disclose the Russia investigation to the American people. And now there are a lot of people who think he's illegitimate, and it's something that he himself thinks is a cloud hanging over his presidency. Didn't, in avoiding, possibly of trying to avoid doing one thing to Hillary Clinton, you did it to Trump?
I don't think so, because I think of the 2 investigations, and everybody working on it in the Department of Justice and the FBI did as well, as quite different. Very early stage counterintelligence investigation of Americans, not Donald Trump, a small group trying to figure out, is there any connection between those people and the Russian effort? Separate from the Russian effort, which we had important discussions about whether to publicize that, but I don't know what we would have said in the early stages. We weren't investigating Donald Trump. We had just started. I think there actually wasn't serious consideration given to it because it wouldn't be remotely appropriate under our policies.
You call it very early stages in October 2016, but you disclosed it in March 2017. That's only 5 months later. Was there really such a difference in terms of disclosing it?
But only in a general way. I mean, 5 months later, we informed Congress that there was an investigation, but didn't say anything more about that. And the reason for that is the acting Attorney General decided there was such pressure from Congress. Senator Grassley was holding up the confirmation of the Deputy Attorney General unless he got more information, that there were important prudential reasons for the Department of Justice to say something in general about it 5 months later.
You admit in your book that you made 2 mistakes in the Clinton investigation. One of them was using the phrase extremely careless to describe Secretary Clinton's handling of classified information. You said that was a mistake. What phrase should you have used?
I don't know. Even in hindsight, I haven't come up with a better way to capture that it was something above mere sloppiness. We're talking about 8 top secret emails, dozens of secret emails. And so we were trying to find a way to honestly describe something that was above just ordinary carelessness, leaving a document on a counter at a restaurant or something by accident, and criminal misconduct. It was between those 2.
But you still don't have a phrase that would have been.
I still don't. You might expect I've kind of suppressed the effort to try and figure it out since then.
After you were fired, President Trump tweeted that there might be tapes of your private conversations. You say you decided to ask your friend to then leak some information about your interactions with the president. Not classified information, but information about your interactions with the president. And you say you did this, you testified that you did this to try to force the creation of a special counsel. Why? Why would a special counsel be needed? Why would the Department of Justice and FBI not be able to continue to do the job?
Because I thought that the department, as currently supervised, would not be aggressive enough to go serve process to get the tapes.
Because Jeff Sessions is too weak.
Well, he had recused himself. And
so Rod Rosenstein was too weak.
There was a new Deputy Attorney General who I didn't have confidence in given what I'd seen around my firing. And so I thought something has to be done, because there were lots of discussions in public then about appointing a special prosecutor. Something has to be done to push them to appoint someone who will have the gumption to go get the tapes.
What do you say to people who say, boy, that seems awfully manipulative, not your role, and maybe even it seems like payback?
Yeah, I don't think of it that way. I was a private citizen who saw something I could do. I thought that was very, very important, and I did it, and it obviously acknowledged it the moment I was asked about it publicly. I thought it was something that needed to be done, and a private citizen can talk about their unclassified conversations with the president.
Yeah, but the average private citizen doesn't think to him or herself, I'm going to leak this information so as to force the creation of a special counsel. I mean, it's an extraordinary gambit that you made, and obviously it paid off, and congratulations, but it it's not the kind of thing that the average private citizen would do.
Of course not. But the average private citizen, first of all, I don't take any joy in it, so I don't accept the congratulations. But the average private citizen didn't have a one-on-one conversation with the President of the United States where he asked him to drop a criminal investigation and then tweet at him after he's fired that he better hope there aren't tapes. I was in a position, given what I knew, to do something that would be useful and important, and so I did it. And reasonable people can disagree about it, but I still think it was the right thing to do.
I asked you earlier about Andrew McCabe, your deputy. I also want to ask you about FBI agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who worked at the FBI. There's been a lot in the news about text messages they sent back and forth in which they disparaged a lot of people, including President Trump. Now, you say you had no idea that they were having an affair or about the text messages, and I take you at your word. But put yourself in Donald Trump's shoes for 1 second. You're Donald Trump, and you feel this is unfair, this investigation. You find out that Peter Strzok, the lead FBI agent, is texting somebody disparaging things about you, and then you find out that he's the one that actually helped conduct the Hillary Clinton interview, and he called you an idiot. Wouldn't you think that this whole thing was unfair and politicized?
Sure, I get why he'd be very concerned about that. It's the reason Bob Mueller removed Peter Strzok, who's an excellent agent, but removed him from that investigation. It's poor judgment, and it shouldn't happen. So I get the concern about it.
Your book is about leadership throughout. Does it say anything about your leadership that Strzok, who was a very high-level FBI agent, was doing this? Did you set in any way any sort of tone where that kind of glib insult of a major political candidate at the time would be not that big a deal?
No, but it does say something about my leadership. I mean, I'm responsible for the senior members of my team, and I've asked myself the same question. I tried to model a certain way of acting, which did not include that kind of behavior, but I asked myself, should I have given them all a speech? But these are grown-ups. These are senior people in the counterintelligence division. I don't want to be too tough on myself, but yeah, I'm responsible. I'm responsible for their actions and their poor judgment.
Speaking of leadership, after you were fired, you say you got a phone call from then Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, now the Chief of Staff at the White House, in which he referred to the president as dishonorable and was talking about quitting. You told him not to quit. Were you surprised when he took a job as the White House Chief of Staff, and have you been surprised to see him as one of President Trump's strongest defenders?
I don't remember John calling the president dishonorable. He was talking about people, and I don't like you being treated this way, and I won't stay and work with people that would treat you in such a dishonorable way.
Who else would he be talking about?
Well, I don't know, but he didn't. I just want to be clear. He didn't say the president by name.
That's fair, and I appreciate the clarification. But just to dial down on this point, who else would he be talking about? Who else mistreated you other than President Trump, in his view or your view?
No, that's fair. I don't know what he had in his head, but he might have meant the attorney